There's a lot of
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Fred Farias, Vice Chair of the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. The Chair, Ms. Shepard, sends her apologies. She is unable to join us today, so I will be presiding over the committee meeting today. Please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet. Please turn your phones off. Agenda item 2 is consideration of approval of the minutes from our June 28th, 2017 committee meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Steen, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda item 3 is consideration of approval of the consent calendar. Items listed on consent are items 5L, 1 through 11. Any questions or discussion? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Raven, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is public testimony on agenda items relating to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. We do not have anyone that's registered to testify at this time. We'll move on to the next item. Agenda item 5, matters relating to the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success. 5A is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Graduate Education Advisory Committee. This is for informational item only. Dr. Sunny Singh, Chair of this committee, will provide a brief summary of the committee activities and he'll be available for questions. Welcome, Dr. Singh.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you what the Graduate Education Advisory Council, affectionately referred to as GEAC, has been up to for the prior fiscal year. There were 2 meetings that were held in the last fiscal year on September 30th of 2016 and then on February 27th of 2017. And that doesn't include, of course, the meeting that was just held this past Monday. I'd like to offer in broad strokes the 3 major themes that had been discussed by the GEAC, and those include the RAND report. Some, I think, meaningful discussion was had so that the coordinating board staff could hear some of the perspectives of the institutions. Those discussions continue and certainly continued this past Monday, among which were themes related to the major elements of the RAND report, and that was to assess the need to expand and grow programs, to provide guidance on how to prepare and evaluate graduate programs, and of course how to manage the graduate program expansion. Whereas the committee all recognized the value and importance of the RAND report, there was also a consensus that we wanted to take advantage of some other resources that were also available, not to include such initiatives as reimagining first year. There's data coming out from that, and I think the board has, or excuse me, the coordinating the GEAC has been looking into that as well. The other major item that had been discussed over the 2 meetings included the revision to the characteristics for doctoral programs. This is a revision from what was historically referred to and specific to the research-based doctoral programs, and it was referred to as the 18 characteristics of doctoral programs. That we talked about and provided input on how to incorporate characteristics of professional doctoral programs, which is now rolling forward. So there was some good discussion along those lines, and indeed institutions are working to implement those so we can provide that data to the public. And finally, there's been some good work done. This past Monday, I think we heard a lot of really good discussion surrounding the statewide strategic plan for graduate education. It was recognized that there are precious few states in the United States that actually have a statewide graduate education strategic plan, and so there was a value recognized in doing so. There were several points that were discussed. The 3 themes to date that have emerged, and I want to stress the to date part because it is an evolution, include under the umbrella of incentivizing and investing in excellence, to consider scholarly and creative activity, the quality of education, and to include addressing of marketable skills, and efficiency and innovation, how we can leverage the collaborative spirit within Texas to do better in graduate education. There was clear and recognition that which what the GIAC recommends in drafting this strategic plan will have a very good eye to the 60 by 30 TX strategic plan, as well as what other information is available, including the RAND report. I'm happy to go into any more specifics should the board be interested, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Any questions for Dr. Singh?
I've got a question. So what's the difference between a traditional doctoral program and then a professional doctoral program? Why is there a difference?
Professional doctoral programs would include, for example, nursing degrees, medical degrees, dentistry degrees, pharmacy degrees, and that kind of thing, typically where there's a licensure exam associated with the doctoral program. Those were not captured in what was previously referenced as the 18 characteristics of doctoral programs. Those referred to those programs that typically had thesis, practicum reports, dissertations associated with them. And so there was a desire to include, so as to be more comprehensive on the doctoral program offerings in the state of Texas, to have that reported as well. I will recognize and admit that a lot of the information that's going to be captured in this revised document that now considers 3 sections of the characteristics of the doctoral programs. One that's specific to the traditional doctoral programs, if you will, the research-based, those that are specific to the professional-based, and those that are common to both. So that's now going to move forward as a single document. And there was, again, some, I think, meaningful feedback that was provided by the GIAC to the coordinating board in the refinement of that document.
Questions?
Sorry, you gave us a brief rundown of what some of the topics you've been discussing as you
Sure.
formulate the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you had included discussion of employment outcomes and of debt loads. I know that's also related to our 60 by 30.
Absolutely. And, one of the challenges, so that is part of it. I tried to create some broad strokes without going into too much detail, recognizing, of course, that it's a work in progress. There's been, there was, again, some good discussion this past Monday. And I think that'll lead to a pretty good, meaningful draft. Absolutely, those things were discussed. One of the key things that the GIAC recognized and discussed as well is, this strategic plan must be relevant to all flavors, if you'll pardon the phrase, of graduate education in the state of Texas. And one of the things we have to guard against is making a strategic plan so generic that it actually loses its meaning and purpose. So I think to give you a sense, the GIAC membership is being very thoughtful about how to define something that's quite relevant, consistent with the 60 by 30 in all its elements, and utilizing what data is available with the help and support of the coordinating board staff.
Any other questions or discussion comments?
Well, so what's the time frame?
The time frame is we are to have a draft for consideration of the GIAC for the February 2018 meeting. And then shortly thereafter, we expect that our recommendations will go forward to the coordinating board staff. And of course, none of what we do is being done in a vacuum. We are in constant engagement with the coordinating board staff, and so hopefully there won't be too many surprises along the way. And then it should come to you all for your consideration and recommendation through the commissioner.
We'll look forward to that.
Me too.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Steen?
So, Dr. Singh, I understand you're focused on graduate education.
Yes, sir.
And so you're developing a strategic plan for graduate education. So help me, explain to me how that meshes with 60 by 30 TX.
It does, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the key points that we ask is just as much as undergraduate programs think about and talk about how they can better partner with K through 12 to better prepare those students for success in an undergraduate program. There was some discussion about how we might engage with undergraduate programs and institutions so they're better prepared for success in graduate programs, and that in turn feeds the market, if you will. I would also point out related to that is a lot of this is with a very keen eye to the job market, both existing as well as the future. Recognizing we don't have the crystal ball, as we all recognized, we appreciated the fact that some of the creation of the future job market is at the hands of the faculty and programs right now. So that spectrum of consideration was entertained. So yes, the GIAC, by its very name and nature, is focused on graduate education, but it wasn't blind to the contextual position it has in higher education as a whole.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Singh? If not, Dr. Singh, thank you for chairing the committee, for Graduate Education Advisory Committee. Thank you for bringing us up to date on the activities, and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all.
Thanks. Okay, I want to skip over to agenda item 5I, which is lunch. If the committee would like to break for lunch, we can do that now. The committee will now break for lunch, and while a quorum will likely be present, no public business or public policy over which this board has supervision or control will be discussed. We intend to reconvene in 30 minutes, which will be, it's going to be in 1 minute noon, so we'll be back at 12:29. Do I hear a motion? Motion by Mr. Raven, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor? We stand adjourned. 12:29.
Couldn't say 12:30.
No, I want to be 30 minutes.
Did you figure it out with that one?
Yeah, but you didn't answer.
Okay, we are back in session. It's 12:33. We will go back to item number 5B. Agenda item 5B is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Certification Advisory Council. The chair of the committee could not be here today, so Dr. Peebles will provide a brief summary of the latest activities and be available to answer questions. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. The Certification Advisory Committee was created to provide the board and staff with recommendations and advice, particularly regarding schools that are interested in applying for a certificate of authority with the coordinating board. And just to remind you that institutions that operate under a certificate of authority are those that have not been accredited by one of the board-recognized accrediting bodies or by one of the regional accrediting bodies. So in effect, the board itself then acts as an accrediting body for those institutions for a limited amount of time. So the Certification Advisory Committee comes together on a quarterly basis as needed to review those applications. And when we get an application, there is a site visit conducted at those schools. The committee then reviews the results of the site visit, reviews the results of the recommendations of the site committee's chair and their report, and then makes a recommendation to the board regarding these institutions. And so in this past year, they have considered 3 institutions. They have considered Guidance College twice. Guidance College came before them at one point, and the committee determined that they had not met all of the standards that we have for a certificate of authority. So the institution went back and worked on it and came back with a second application. They also reviewed Medicine College of Biomedical Engineering Equipment, and that particular group did receive a positive recommendation and came to this board and was approved this past year. And also the Southwest School of Art, which is actually a subsequent agenda item to look at their third certificate of authority. But they have been, all 3 of these institutions have been reviewed by the Certification Advisory Council.
Any questions for Dr. Peebles on that? Thank you, Dr. Peebles. We'll move on to agenda item 5C, and this is consideration of adopting the Certification Advisory Council's recommendation to the committee relating to the request from Southwest School of Art for a third certificate of authority to grant degrees in Texas. Dr. Peebles.
So this is, as just stated, this is Southwest Schools of Arts, their third application for a certificate of authority. And I'll remind you that an institution can only operate under a certificate of authority for 8 years or for 4 certificates, if you will. At the end of that time period, if they have not been accredited by a regional accrediting body or one of the other board-recognized accrediting bodies in the country, then that institution would simply cease to operate under, or at least operate legally in the state of Texas. And so Southwest School of Art was originally formed as a, years and years ago, as really as a sort of a community service. They've been in San Antonio for a long, long time. They offer classes to the community. They do a lot of work with schools. And, well, probably now about 5 or 6 years ago, they decided to try to expand to a Bachelor of Fine Arts, at which point they then came to us for their first certificate of authority. And they have been operating under one since then. And again, this would be their third certificate of authority. There was a site visit conducted, and the Council on for Accreditation, our Certification Advisory Council reviewed those recommendations from the site visit and from recommendations from the staff, and recommend approval of the Southwest School of Art for a third certificate of authority. And they are seeking candidacy status with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools.
Any questions or discussion?
Dr. Peoples, I have one question. Could you explain their affiliation with the Southwest Crafts Center? Is that their parent company when it says that they were incorporated or in 1965, or could you just clarify what?
Well, that's how they originally started, and
Name?
yes, that was their
Okay.
original name, and
Thank
they've
you.
now kind of morphed into this, their current title.
Mr. Steen?
So we've done this, we've granted a certificate of authority for, it lasts for 2 years.
Yes, sir.
and we've done it, and so they've had 4 years now, and that this would take them to 6.
Right.
And then you're saying they have to get this other accreditation. If 8 years runs out, then they're...
Then they're finished. Yes, sir.
And as part of what we do in considering this, are we monitoring how they're doing toward getting that?
Yes, a part of the application that they have to file with us, particularly after their initial certificate of authority, but their subsequent certificates of authority, always ask for the progress that they've made in getting accredited by either a regional body, as in this case, they're seeking Southern Association, which is one of the 6 regional accrediting bodies, accreditation. So we always ask for an update and a status on where they are with in making progress toward that. And, you know, and part of the reasoning behind only giving them 8 years, which in some respects sounds like a long time, but accreditation is especially initial accreditation it can be a very lengthy process for institutions that are just getting started. And so a part of that is to make sure that they have everything they have in place. And so we also look for progression in the institution itself. Have they continued to progress in terms of their curriculum or their facilities, faculty? And so that there's some indication to us that they're also doing what they need to do to ultimately get accreditation.
So with all the experience you have with this, it looks like it can take this long, and it looks like they are taking the right steps, and you would expect them to get this accreditation from Southern Association?
Yes, at this point I would expect them to, yes.
All right, well, this is, of course, an institution in my hometown, very well regarded, so I'll make the motion.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor by Mr. Steen. A second, Ms. Acosta. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5D is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request for a new degree program from the University of Houston downtown for a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree with a major in nursing. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. So this is a request for a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing, but it's important to point out that this particular request is made for what is referred to as a completion degree, or sometimes called a transition degree. And so this particular degree plan would be open to those students who already have an associate degree in nursing, which they typically receive from a community college. They also usually get licensed at that point, and a lot of these folks are already practicing nurses, but they want to get a BSN. And one of the things that has become very clear is that while I think the shortage of nurses itself may be somewhat questionable in some places, there is no doubt that there is a shortage of bachelor's prepared nurses, because a lot of hospitals have decided that they want to make the move. It's been recommended to them to try to have a staff of nurses that are at least 80% bachelor's prepared nurses, and so there is a growing recognition of that, and then a growing concern about meeting that particular need. And this particular kind of program is designed to meet that particular need, and they do have a partnership with Houston Community College now that can take their students and then allow them to complete, and they're also working on a partnership with Lone Star that would allow the same thing to happen.
Any questions for Dr. Peebles?
I wanted to ask really quickly, this program sounds great, like it might be really cost-effective for students. I was looking at the second page and the duplication of program chart, and it kind of made me wonder how this might be affected by the expansion of bachelor's degrees, or the baccalaureate expansion to 2-year institutions.
Well, it's kind of interesting, because the question I think would almost be in reverse. So that if you approve this program today, then how would the approval of this program affect those institutions, community colleges who then want to get a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing? Because one of the things that we have to look at is capacity issues and demand, and whether 4-year institutions and really existing programs already have the capacity to address the workforce need and or the student demand for these programs. So the question, yeah, it really would be, how would this then impact them? And I think in that sense, then the, an addition of another program would impact, particularly the Houston area, in that sense then, about whether Houston Community College or Lone Star or any of the other community colleges in that immediate vicinity would be able to then demonstrate that there still is a need for more nurses. And given the numbers, that might not be that difficult. But then they would also have to talk about whether the existing institutions have the capacity to meet that need or not.
Would you mind briefly reminding, I know that the bill passed this past session would have authorized bachelor's degrees in nursing. What were the other programs that were?
They can also offer degrees in what are called Bachelors of Applied Science or a Bachelor of Applied Arts and Sciences. Those programs need to be built off of existing successful Associate of Applied Science degrees. And I always use the classic example of Brazosport College that developed a program for the process technology industry down there, that students within an existing Associate of Applied Science and Process Technology could then go on to get a bachelor's degree that would provide them with some of the managerial knowledge and skills to move up in the refineries.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, no, I just would like to make the motion to approve it. It sounds like they've got some great partnerships already lined up, and it's going to definitely fill a need.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Acosta, second by Mr. Raven. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5E is a report to the Committee on School Closures and/or Teach-Outs pursuant to Chapter 7, Subchapter A, Section 7.75. This is an informational item only. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. So you'll notice in your blue pages that there are 3 institutions involved in current teach-outs and closures. 2 of them are Strayer University locations, and then 1 National American University. And all of these really represent consolidations. Both of these entities have locations otherwise and elsewhere, and so they have been very diligent in making sure that students at these existing locations, in National American's case, they actually tried to make sure that all the students were taught out before they closed, and in the other instance, they provided students with the opportunity to either move physically to another location in the same city or to provide online education to them.
Okay. Any questions or discussion on that? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 5F. This is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the request from Cisco College for a branch campus maintenance tax election. Dr. Peebles.
Oh, thank you. So Cisco College is a community college located in sort of central, northwest Texas. Its home is in Eastland County in Cisco, Texas, which is the home of Hilton Hotels, by the way.
That's right.
Yeah, so if you ever go there, they have the original Hilton Hotel. There's still a site in Cisco, yeah,
Yes.
in Eastland, rather. And so Cisco College is like a lot of community colleges. They have a large service area, but they have a small taxing district. And so what a branch maintenance tax allows them to do is to go into a county that they serve and levy a tax up to 5 cents per evaluation. And actually, that tax is levied by the county commissioner's court, not by the college itself, but the commissioner's court then can levy it up to 5 cents per $100 of evaluation. And it provides some revenue for the institution to operate in that county. And so in this particular case, they want to hold an election in Taylor County, which Abilene is located in. And Cisco, for a number of years, has had an educational center in Abilene. They're also one of those community colleges where their service area is become, population-wise, has become much bigger than their taxing district is. And so if you look at the service area for Cisco College, most of the population that they serve is in Abilene and Taylor County, not in Eastland County or the other counties in their particular area. And so in order to hold the election, then they need to go through an application process that your blue pages details all of the relevant parts of that, where we look at, and they have to attest to the fact that they have the appropriate capacity and the ability to serve that area, particularly with those additional funds. They usually have to have a petition, but if their population of the county is less than 150,000, no petition is required. And so they can come directly to the board and seek permission to hold the election. So the election is held will be held in that particular county in November of 2017 if they choose to pursue it. And then those voters will decide whether the branch maintenance tax actually goes into effect. So all that we're doing here today is just approve them to hold the election itself.
Okay,
But
any
again-
questions?
Again, why do they come to us? What's our part in this again, just in a nutshell?
Statute requires them to have permission from the coordinating board to hold these
But
elections.
what are we basing our vote on?
And we, well, as I said, they do have turn in an application to us that details whether they have met the requirements for establishing a steering committee that tries to take the pulse of the local community, if you will. If they're big enough, they also have to have a petition that has been signed by registered voters in order to hold the election, and we would have to certify that that petition is valid. That's actually done in the county, but then we sort of certify that as well. But we do look at things like their instructional plans. What do they plan to do with the money? In this case, the Abilene Educational Center has been serving them for some time, but this will allow them to expand their facility there, particularly offer more career and technical education programs.
When you were looking at this, was there a lot of back and forth on it, or whatever they submitted initially, was that all they needed to do?
There was a little bit, because we will always ask questions if questions arise in our review, but in this particular case, they actually did a very good job up front, and so while we asked for some questions for clarification, it was a good application.
So to proceed with the process, we need to check off on it, but then ultimately, the people that are going to be taxed are going to vote on it.
Yeah, and they'll have to approve it, and so, and if they turn it down in the election, then that's the end of it, so.
So move.
We have a motion by Mr. Steen, a second by Mr. Raven. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5G is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request to establish a contract with the University of Texas at Austin for maintenance of the Applied Texas system. Mr. Booker.
Good afternoon. The coordinating board, we're requesting to reestablish a contract with the University of Texas. They are the original designers of the Applied Texas, our common application to attend college. Every 3 or 4 years this comes up where we're dealing with this contract. The interesting part about this contract this time is they're actually migrating systems to a new system, a new database, new mainframe. It should run faster, be able to keep more information. This contract is kind of, we oversee the contract with the use of an advisory committee that actually comes to report to you every year, once a year, about their work. This contract will last about 4 years. I think the cost is $3.2 million. That's for the first year, it's a little higher than normal, only because of this transition to the new mainframe, but it balances back out like other years that we've had previously. Couple points you may not be aware of I want to highlight about the Applied Texas system is it has a scholarship application where students not only fill out their college application, but they can apply for scholarships at their institutions. And then a counselor suite, which I think is critical. It's a back engine for the counselors of Texas, the K-12 counselors, to kind of track to see whether their students actually completing applications, completing a FAFSA, and can kind of stay on top of them and help them monitor that activity. So from that standpoint, we had an RFA years ago to actually design this. UT has done a great job for it. They have the capacity to do it, so we're looking to actually reestablish this contract moving forward.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Booker or discussion on this topic?
So move.
Second, but I have a question.
Question? Okay, Mr.
So
Steen.
this was first done it started in 1997?
The original, the statute.
And you did have a request, did you say an RFA? And
I
so the decision at that point was to let University of Texas
Right.
proceed? And
that's
then
correct.
once they did it, are we then locked into that?
No, we're actually not locked in. We haven't, since it's a public institution, we've kind of stayed with it because no one else has had the ability or raised the issue to actually to do this. I think it also might be a little cost prohibitive at that stage. But I think the reason they got it in the first place is they had this something called a SPEEDE system, SPEEDE, can't even recall what it stands for, which distributed all the transcripts for the state from high school to other institutions, so it kind of made sense that they already had the ability to do it and designed it. But to this degree, we've been happy with it and haven't actually changed that.
But we don't have any obligation to take it out and for to bid it out every number of years or something like that?
I'm not sure about obligation, but I do know because it's a public institution, we haven't had to necessarily do that. I don't know if Bill wants to provide any more guidance, but it just has not, over the last at least 4 years, come up in that term.
Council, when you see something like this that we've been doing, since '97, it does raise the question: are we supposed to open it up to others at some point, or?
We certainly could. There is no legal requirement that we do so, since the contract is with a public institution of higher education. In essence, we're keeping the money all within the family. But if another institution, for example, indicated an interest in pursuing a contract with us to perform these functions, I would think that it would be incumbent upon us to at least take a look at that. But as Mr. Booker has pointed out, to my knowledge, nobody has raised that as an issue.
The interesting thing, and you may not know this, all the institutions pay into to operate the Applied Texas system. So it's based off their previous year fall enrollment. They all pay into it. Obviously, up to 25 different institutions serve on the advisory committee, and it just has not come up as an issue yet around that.
Okay. Any other discussion? If not, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Raven, a second from Mr. Steen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5H is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the approval of additional funding for Texas State University to continue providing professional development for institutions implementing co-requisite models for underprepared students. House Bill 2223, 85th Texas Legislature regular session. Mr. Booker.
So what this is we're seeking approval to amend the current contract that was competitively bid, that was given to Texas State University to provide technical assistance around developmental education. That contract in 2015, I think it was $500,000 to provide technical assistance to hold a couple of statewide convenings around developmental education, to also hold regional trainings for the different institutions in the state. But with the pass of House Bill 2223, which is a major change in how we do developmental education in the state, requiring underprepared students to be, we call it mainstreamed or co-rec, where they actually take a developmental course as well as their entry-level college course. And because of that bill, it's been because of that, the bills required a shift, so we have to provide more professional development and technical assistance to the institutions to actually implement co-rec, because not everyone is doing it to the degree that the bill is asking, which is 25%, 50%, 70% over the next 2 and 3 years. So because of that growth, we've asked for an amendment so we can actually provide a little bit more technical assistance going into the fall for the implementation of this bill.
So, Mr. Booker, I'm very supportive of this effort. I just want a clarification, if you don't mind. So 500,000 of this was from 2015, and we're asking for an additional 250 and 30,000, or are we asking for a new 780,000?
So it's 500,000, and then last December we asked for,
That we're
we
asking
amended that.
for, or we have it?
We have that. That's
Okay, got it.
done and gone.
Okay.
Then in last December we asked for 250 to expand it, and right now we're asking for 30.
Okay, got
So
it.
really, this request is for the 30.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion for approval.
Okay, we have a motion for Mr. Costa and a second, Mr. Raven. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 5I, which we've already covered, lunch. We will continue through 5J 1 through 7 items is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the appointment of members to several fields of study advisory committees. 1, biology, 2, business administration and management, 3, criminal justice, 4, kinesiology and exercise science, and 5, psychology. Also, appointments of members to the number 6, Graduate Education Advisory Committee and the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. Normally, or often, we put these on the consent calendar, but we thought it might be important to talk a little bit about how members are chosen a little bit, and also give you some sense of just how many of these things we have going at any given time. So members are chosen, first of all, they're nominated by institutions, so we will send out a call to institutions and seek nominations based on folks' expertise. For example, for the biology field of study, then we would ask for folks who either are teaching biology or administrators who have oversight of biology programs. And then once we receive those nominations, then typically membership has to be divided between 2-year and 4-year institutions. So a typical advisory committee is 24 members, and it'd be 12 community college or 2-year institutions, because we also include the TSTC and the Lamar Institutes of Technology in that group, and then 12 members from 4-year institutions. The only exceptions to that are GAC, for example, which is graduate education, so all 24 of their members come from 4-year institutions offering graduate programs. And the other exception to that is programs of study, which are geared toward 2-year associate degrees. And those committees are made up of about half of community college faculty or administrators, and then roughly 25% folks from secondary, from folks in high school who teach those same kind of programs or have oversight for them, and the other 25% is from business and industry. So we also try to get folks from the actual work sector itself to give us some input on the kind of courses and learning outcomes that we need. Then those nominations then are scrutinized, and we also have or we make attempts to try to spread this out as much as we can in terms of looking at rural versus urban institutions, small, medium, and large institutions, to try to have some mix of the different kinds of institutions that are involved in this in terms of either size, and we also look at a regional basis, so geography also plays some part in this. And then we also, as much as we can, we try to pay some attention to, or do pay attention to, diversity issues in terms of gender, racial, ethnic background, where that's possible. I will admit that sometimes, and this is particularly true of field of study and program of study, sometimes we don't, well, we take every nomination we get because we don't get enough to actually cover, or we take almost every nomination we get because we don't get enough. And then sometimes we have an overabundance, and we really have to narrow it down from a lot of nominations down to the 24. Some of these committees, like the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee, Graduate Education Advisory Committee, and so forth, are committees that are ongoing. Some of them have been in place for several years. Members usually serve 6-year terms, and so we try to replace about a third every year. And when we do this, we also look at some rotation among institutions as well. There are 50 community colleges plus the Lamars, and we can only pick 12. So we try to make sure that there's some rotation among the institutions to try to get some diversity of opinion there. Anything that we do that's going to wind up in the form of either a formal policy or a rule that would come to the coordinating board then is also vetted publicly as well, so that people get a chance to weigh in on it.
I just wanted to add another reason we wanted to have these off the consent calendar, this particular committee, the Field of Study Advisory Committees, is our efforts to identify fields of study for those areas in which we have the most transfers, majors in which we have the most transfers to universities. So this is a central part of our transfer efforts to make that process more efficient. And every one of these programs you see here are among the top majors. And so you're going to be seeing more of these as we try to get to the point where the vast majority of the majors in which students transfer, we have a clear-cut field of study so they'll know what to take before they transfer.
Very good. Any further discussion?
I just had a really kind of an observation. One of the things that I get asked a lot up in North Texas is, you know, how do I get our folks more involved in some of these committees? And you just went through the process and covered just about every question that I would have had or that someone would have had. I would say, is there a way that we can get or kind of a heads up, these are the 5 things we're looking at in the next 6 months, or some way to get that information out to us as individuals, as board members, if we would like to have it, so we can tap others in our community about, hey, this is coming up, because it seems like they're missing it. And I don't know if they're just not seeing it or they just aren't the ones that are receiving it. But just in a nutshell, if we could have some of that, I'd be happy to help be a part of disseminating the request to have names submitted.
Yeah, and it is true that we often struggle, particularly in the business and industry side, when we're trying to find folks for our programs of study committees. And I think part of that is that we haven't quite figured out yet how to tap into that, so that could be very useful. We have talked a lot internally and about how to make sure that we get these in front of the institutions and get them in front of them on a regular basis, so that at least on a quarterly basis, probably after a board meeting where some of these may have been approved, we're always out there about, this is what's coming up, this is what's planned. And we could copy the board on that, or whatever would be appropriate to also get that information to y'all as well.
Very good. Do I have a motion?
I've got a question.
Oh, yes,
How
Mr.
many
Steen.
advisory committees are there? I've stumped you?
Well, I'm trying to think of how many. There's a lot.
Let me give one answer.
Yeah.
Through the
About how many?
Through the sunset process, we reduced and eliminated a number of our advisory committees.
They're
And we
good.
consolidated, but going forward,
He's counting them on his fingers.
we are going to potentially have as many as 25 or 30 when you add in all the field of study advisory committees going forward, and it's hard to know exactly when they will overlap.
So
And that's one
about
reason-
30.
Yeah, there are committees in Ken's area,
Two. Yeah.
and
So around, I don't really need.
we can
the
count
exact
them
number.
for you, but it.
No, but how many about?
So there's about 25 in my division alone. We have 6 that are fairly standard, and you heard from Graduate Education Advisory Committee today, and so we have those that are routinely report: undergraduate education, the learning technology committee, and then we have about 20 or so of the field of study and program of study in place right now.
All right. So you put out this call for nominations, and what you're saying is that with some of the committees, you're actually oversubscribed. You actually have to sit down and make decisions, and others, you have to be proactive and sort of go out there and try to find people that'll serve on them. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And we will sometimes extend the nomination period and try to do some outreach and recruiting to get some folks.
So, and I don't know if this was, but I had somebody in my community that I thought would be really good for one of these advisory committees. So I don't know if it was the right procedure, but I nominated him. And I think then he had to go, he was with a community college, he had to go to his chancellor, and his chancellor ended up formally nominating him. Yeah. So do you welcome that from us? If we have some people in our community that we think would be good, would you like to hear from us?
Now, sure, it still needs to go through that formal process.
We want to encourage
You
people.
hesitated, okay.
Yes.
But it still needs to go through the formal process of coming through their chancellors and chief academic officers.
So I think what I'm hearing from Dr. Peebles is if any of us have suggestions, maybe we can get with Dr. Peebles to make sure we get it through the proper channel to the presidents or the chancellors that actually get the letters for the recommendations.
But ultimately, they're the ones who need to sign off on
Right.
the nominations
Right.
to make sure that we're open to
Okay,
everybody.
so I think that's a good point that Ms. Acosta and Mr. Steen are bringing up, that if any of us have suggestions, we could go through Dr. Peebles, and he could make sure they get in contact with the proper president or chancellors to be able to be considered. I think that's a good suggestion. Any other discussion on the topic?
I just wanted to ask also, since this seems like a good point, since it's normally on the consent calendar, what's your sense for how well the fields of study kind of initiative in general is working? Do you get any feedback from, for instance, faculty members who are teaching students who are prepared through field of study curricula?
It's really too early for that kind of feedback. So the coordinating board created about 10 of these. That goes back 12, 14 years ago. Many of those are still legally in force, but it's only been in the last year and a half that we have begun to revise some of those and also create new ones. And you may recall at the last board meeting, you approved 4 new fields of study. So we have 5 that are new. You'll have some more at the next board meeting we hope will come in for approval. So it's a little bit early to tell that. I think that the process itself is working very well, and I think part of it going forward is going to be this sort of our own advertising, if you will, and to make sure the institutions are aware that they're there. To make and that's both at both the institutions that are offering them at the 2-year level, but also those institutions that receive them at the 4-year level. Although I think it's important to note that if a student takes one of these fields of study at a 4-year institution, then that also transfers to another 4 institution as well. So it's the lower division requirements for a program. So, but again, to answer your question, I think it's a little bit too early to tell about that, although we've already set up or in the process of setting up some tracking mechanisms so that we can, and we'll be able to report back to the board on how many students are actually using these things and then get some feedback on how well they operate. The Fields of Study Committee themselves have been interesting. They vary from difficult to easy. Most faculty wind up making arguments about the fact that it's their institution that doesn't do it that way. They actually rarely get into any substantive arguments about the subject matter content. Almost all of their discussion is around how they do it and when they do it in their program, rather than the fact that they don't think somebody ought to know this particular thing. So there are oftentimes some adjustments that people need to make all the way around in terms of the particular course something winds up in or the particular semester it's in. But it typically is pretty remarkable to me about the agreement on what ought to be taught in that particular field and what it is that students ought to know going forward. So.
I just wanted to give Rex some additional credit in that since he's come, he identified something in the development of the field of study process that wasn't incorporated before, and that is they're instructed to look into the core with the field of study to make sure they point out when that course accounts in the field of study can actually be taken in the core rather than outside the core, which increases the efficiency of the program, and I think that's very important. Also, we've noted over time, and Rex and I had some discussion about this when he first came, that very few community colleges have reported to us, and there's a field for them to report that, field of study completers. Rex has felt that they're underreporting that, and we don't know that, but I've talked at least initially with Julia and her staff about are there ways that we can actually, with our data, begin to monitor which schools are more efficient in transfer and which are not. And if it turns out that some of the schools will recognize that maybe had they been using the field of study, they'd be more inclined to do it. But we have to figure out a way to do that. But right now we can monitor through data. We have not been, but we will with field of study. What is it working that way? I've only received really one concern from the field about, and it was years ago, about students whose courses weren't being transferred that were and counted that were in the field of study. And when I checked, and this was with Texas A&M, and it turned out that A&M was counting every course that the student took in the field of study. The problem was the student had not taken math courses that they should have taken. And so we will follow up, and I've told our colleagues at community colleges if they would alert us, we will follow up, but I think we need to find a more aggressive way to figure out that without people reporting.
Okay, so I just want to make a comment that usually this is on the consent calendar, but this is a very good discussion because this is a very important area. I had the opportunity to be on the University of Houston campus this past week. Went through the Student Center and went into some of the new facilities that they're doing. And so, and I talked to the head of the research and information, the dean, and I talked to as well as some faculty members. And so it was very interesting to find out that they do want to get involved with the coordinating board and these advisory committees. So it's really important information. And so thank you to the staff for recommending these folks and kind of vetting them, let's say. Do I have a motion on this? A motion by Mr. Raven, second by Mr. Costa. All in favor, please say aye. Motion passes. Agenda item 5K1 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to issuance of a request for applications for the Minority Health Research and Education Grant Program. Dr. Peebles.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was just going to skip right over that one, but but I'm okay now.
Okay. Don't want to put you on the spot, but you're on
No,
the
it's
spot.
fine. Getting eager, I guess. So the Minority Health Research and Education Grant Program is a result of the tobacco lawsuit settlement, and so that money is trusteed money, and we get to spend some of the proceeds from that fund on efforts to recruit, increase the participation of and the retention of minority students, and particularly in health programs. And so we put out an RFA every year on this, and then we vet those. And so this is to seek approval to put out a new round of requests for applications. These programs have been used in the past to focus on retention efforts and that kind of thing. So.
Question, Ms. Costa?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Dr. Peoples, I just have a question about reaching the rural areas in Texas. I know the RFA is for existing institutions, or I think it says, or centers conducting research. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that we could just make sure that we advertise this, that we're reaching centers that are at least within 50 miles or 100 miles, I don't know how many miles, but around the rural communities? That seems to be just historically what I remember the awards going to, is that we're missing out on being able to reach the rural communities. So I don't know if maybe that's something that we might encourage in the RFA, to say, if you've got access to rural communities, let us know. Still equitable, but kind of do a focus toward that, especially for the parent-based directed treatment. I mean, a lot of times it is the parents that are responsible for this treatment, so they'll have to drive in and get some direction. But I just want to make that comment again. I know I've made it before, but just food for thought. Thank you.
Well, so your question actually addresses the autism program, RFA, rather than the minority health.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That is okay.
Yeah.
But in
We're all kind of all over.
that's okay. So but we do try to emphasize in RFA and encourage proposals that deal with the rural element of those, because we know that that's, for healthcare, both physical and mental, whatever it might be, that's a real difficult. I mean, it's difficult to get to that. And you'll see in a minute that part of what the last legislative session did was added to the eligible institutions for the autism care, all centers, not just public, but also independent and private centers as well. So that will actually go out to more people and more entities than it went to before. And so we do our best to try to reach all of them, but we'll take a look at our outreach efforts on that and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to.
Thank you,
get
Mr.
you to
Chairman.
address that.
Sorry for point of order there.
No worries.
But as to K1, how many students are in this program now, Dr. People?
I do not know the answer to that. Stacy, do you have any sense of how many students are affected by this? Yeah, we can get you some information on that. The grants go to institutions who then in turn try to affect the students, but we have that in the reports, and
Okay.
so we can certainly get that information to you.
And do we know, can you tell us about how those students that are made a part of the program, how they're selected? I mean, based on what criteria?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hit your
Sorry,
mic.
we had a couple of programs that did sort of pipeline outreach efforts to really focus on, really on males going into professions like physical therapy.
Okay.
So there was no connection between the associate degree in physical therapy and the doctoral degree in physical therapy, the DPT. And so one of our more successful programs under this has actually made a ladder and has focused on getting males into the profession, which is a female-dominated profession.
Sure. So has this program been going on since the tobacco settlement was concluded?
It has.
So you're talking about well over 20 years?
Yes.
Yeah, if you could supply us with information on this program, I would be really interested. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll
Thank you
get
so
you
much.
something.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raven. Any other discussion? If not, do I have a motion?
I so move.
Motion by Mr. Raven, second by Mr. Steen. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5K2. This is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the issuance of requests for applications for the Autism Grant Program. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. This particular program is in its second iteration, having been approved in the prior legislative session and then reauthorized in the immediate past legislative session. The dollar amounts are the same, and it does have three separate foci to it. One is to serve children through the parent direct treatment methods, and it really is designed to help equip parents to deal with their children who may have autism. And then the other is to train teachers and paraprofessionals in behavior analyst methods that also then primarily in the school system then work with autistic children as well. And lastly, there's money there for research, develop, and evaluate innovative autism treatment programs. And so this is a request to issue an RFA that would cover those three particular areas. And again, we'll take a look at our distribution on that. It is geared toward the centers that offer these kinds of services, but the last legislative session did include independent centers and private institutions as well. Before it was only public. So that broadens the arena a bit.
That's good.
Questions?
Move for approval.
Okay. Motion for approval by Ms. Acosta. A second? Second. Second by Mr. Raven. All in favor, please say aye. Thank you. Motion passes. Agenda item 5L1 through 11 were on the consent calendar. Agenda item 5M is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to request for a new degree program from the University of Texas Permian Basin for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in electrical engineering. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. And before I discuss the particulars of this particular request, I'd like to draw your attention to the contingencies that are listed there on the blue page. The first page of the blue pages on this particular item. We have rationale up there, and then we have contingencies. And what I want to point out is that these contingencies are the result of a change in policy and process that we're undergoing in trying to look at faculty and the faculty needs for this program. In the past, we have required programs to have faculty in place hired before the program actually started. And we typically required at least 3 FTE, or at least 3 full-time equivalents. Sometimes programs have, or institutions rather, have those faculty there because of existing programs, but sometimes not. And it often places them in somewhat of an awkward position in terms of trying to hire faculty for a program they don't officially have yet. And so that vexes them from time to time. It also vexes us from time to time in trying to work with institutions over that. And so what we've tried to do is arrive at a better scheme, but also one that will ensure that the necessary faculty is there when the program starts and as the program continues. And so that contingencies reflect the idea that we want them to, if they tell us that they're going to need 3 faculty, for example, over the next 2 years to make this program work, and we agree with them that 3 faculty are necessary to make this program work, that they have a plan for hiring those faculty and putting them in place, and then that they verify that by sending us a copy of a letter of commitment, the faculty member's CV. We'll also make funding for these programs contingent upon meeting those contingencies as well as the program goes forward.
I want to clarify one thing that may not be apparent in what you said is that they cannot actually initiate the program until it's verified the faculty are hired that are in the contingency. In the past, occasionally, we would say we approve the program, you're going to hire 2 more people, but they may not. This way, it helps on that end to make sure that what was agreed to is done, but also it gets rid of the catch-22 at the beginning, that if you haven't had a program, you can hire that key faculty member who knows that they're actually being hired for a program, not just being hired. So in talking with the schools, they seem to be very happy with this process. It removes the catch-22, but it gives you clear-cut directions in terms of when can this start and when can it not. So there's one particularly related to these 2 programs Rex will probably mention, related to formula funding and upper division courses. So, once they cannot offer upper division courses in electrical engineering, for example, until they hire the appropriate faculty. They cannot receive formula funding. But there are other areas at the upper level where they have faculty in place from other programs that can teach those and receive formula funding. So it makes it very clear, and they were very happy overall with these remarks. So I don't want to preempt Rex, but Rex and his staff worked very closely with the president and the provost at the institution. I think everybody was very happy with that process, and we appreciated how forthcoming the institution was in terms of where they really were in the program and the desire to have a quality program.
Are we able to confirm here today that they've hired a tenured track faculty member?
Well, that's listed in the contingencies when that will have to happen.
Yeah, but it's fall of 2017, which we're now in.
But it doesn't have to happen until December of 2017.
Yeah. And this.
Oh, so it's by the end of the fall of 2017.
And this is if they were to open the program in fall 2018. So there's time for them to get these things in place. And I know those of us who have taught know when we were a faculty member, we would not leave to go to an institution maybe 1,000 miles away unless we knew they were going to actually have the program in place. It addresses that, but and I should say that if they don't have that faculty member in place in time for fall 2018, then it moves back to the following January. It doesn't mean the approval goes away, but they still can't open until they meet the contingencies.
Yeah, but that's not what this says right here. This says that the person has been hired in the fall of 2017. I understand that may be the end of the fall of 2017, but it says here that faculty member would have been hired.
Well, yeah, and that for first contingencies, they hire one. They have said they would hire one by the end of this fall. That would be their first faculty member, but this is for them to open September 2018. And then there's some additional conditions following. Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, so they won't start admitting students into the electrical engineering program until the fall of 2018.
Okay.
So we want to ensure that they have a faculty member hired prior to that time.
I mean, I get that, but I'm just saying the language here doesn't say that.
It says
it doesn't say by the end of fall of 2017. It just says in the fall of 2017.
Well,
so I was assuming
the entire
that
fall to.
Is it okay if we just change it, that faculty will be in place to begin teaching in the fall? 2018.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I mean, when I read this, I read it to say that somebody's hired right now.
Yeah, it actually, Commissioner, in terms of what's said here, that there's the start date for this particular faculty member they're talking about would be in January of 2018.
That's when they would start.
That's
But
when
the
the
person would
faculty-
be hired in the fall of 2017.
Right.
That's when the program would start.
No,
With the
it's
start
not.
date
No,
for the
no, no.
faculty member.
No.
That's the start date for the faculty member would be
January 2018.
Yeah.
But it
That-
says that the person would be hired in the fall of 2017.
But as you know, hiring someone and when they start can be different. So this was making the point that we want to make sure they're in place by January 2018 to help hire the other faculty.
I mean, I get that. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that when I read this, I was asking whether the person had already been hired. That's all I was asking. Because it suggests that the person would be in place in the fall of 2017, which has already started.
Okay. We can adjust this, make it clear. We say will be hired in the fall 2017, which includes the entire fall. It doesn't set a particular date in the fall, but they would just actually start with the start.
I mean, Dr. Peoples cleared it up. He said by the end, I'm fine with that.
We have a guest.
My name's Dan Heimerman. I'm the provost at UTPB.
Okay. But you want to turn your microphone on, please?
Hi, my name is Dan Heimerman, and I serve as the provost, UT Permian Basin. And thank you. Again, I want to echo the praise for the coordinating board that was mentioned this morning. They've worked very hard on these two proposals, and we appreciate it. Yeah, the plan is, and again, I do want to thank the coordinating board for being really reasonable in our request, is for us to make a hire this fall. We've got 2 job ads posted, one for electrical, one for chemical. We have over 30 applicants for each position. And it is our intention within the next week to bring folks to campus, interview them, make them an offer, get their commitment so that they can begin with us in January 2018. So we're going to get them to sign the dotted line, and we're going to forward that commitment, those commitments to the coordinating board.
That's good enough. That's all I need to know. Thanks. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Dan, I just have a really quick question. So the closest university to the Permian Basin for a BS in electrical engineering would be where?
I believe it's, and my interim dean can correct me, but I believe it's Texas Tech,
Texas Tech,
Okay.
yeah.
which is about 100, a little over 100 miles away to the north.
It is Texas Tech.
If I could add, my great colleague Linda Battles has pointed out, if we just strike in fall 2017, the whole statement still holds up because they're starting in January 2018, and that, I believe that would make it more clear given your point.
Right.
You'd be okay with that?
I
I'm
would, sir.
sure.
Thank you.
All right. I'm fine.
So I just have one quick question. You have an engineering advisory board?
We do.
That's what it says. And who comprises that? Is that business community plus? Or?
Yeah, they are leaders in the Permian Basin community, obviously oil and gas businesses heavily represented. In fact, the origin of these 2 programs go back to those advisory boards. They are the ones who really asked us to develop both programs to support local industry. And so yeah, they perhaps, I don't know, maybe Forrest, are there about 20 or so folks? This is the interim dean, Dr. Flocker, but yes, they hold regular meetings, and they're representative of our local industry, and we really rely upon them to provide us with feedback and how well our programs are doing and what kind of programs that we can develop to better serve our community.
Dr. Heimerman, how many students do you anticipate in the program?
I think in our projections, you may have them before you, but I think initially 50. I think it's in the low 50s the first year. And after, I think, 5 years, I believe we're in close to 200, I think. I think that's
exactly right. 198, you say.
But, you know, again, we believe those are pretty conservative. If you look at some of the things we've submitted to Doug Jansen, who's been extremely helpful during this process, you know, our 2 programs in petroleum and mechanical have really exploded. In fact, in the first 6 years, we have more folks in those programs than any other newly started mechanical engineering. But yeah, so we anticipate about just under 200 or so, again, by our very conservative estimates.
I think those are conservative. Our board approved a program similar in South Texas, and one of my patients is one of the members of the class of 38 students that just started, and they're getting a lot of other applicants. So I think that that's a good, if there's a big need, obviously.
Right.
Other comments? Mr. Steen?
Thank you for traveling a long way. Where do you all live?
We live in Midland, Odessa.
Midland, Odessa. And then you've sat through this all day?
Yeah, we enjoyed it, yes.
Okay. Oh. So, but since you're here, I'll ask you, so why don't you tell us how this program, or both these, we're taking up another program, will support local industry?
Well, I think that there is a tremendous demand. Again, as I mentioned, the origin of these programs goes back to our local advisory board, and please chime in for us at any time. And of course, in the petroleum industry, chemical engineering, electrical engineering, electricity is needed to go to those sites. There's a tremendous demand in the Permian Basin for these two programs.
So that's where these graduates will go, and you think mainly into the...
Well, they could go anywhere. We know that, as a regional comprehensive, we have recognized a significant demand for these two programs in our area. But certainly, we will get some students who go elsewhere, as some of our students do. But there is a tremendous need for both chemical and electrical engineers, as evidenced by the really high salaries. In fact, I think the median salary for chemical is $125,000. In the Permian Basin, it's $138,000, so about 10% more, and that's sort of indicative of the demand. And
what are some of the companies looking for these types of graduates?
Well, we've got a lot of the the mid-sized oil companies, Pioneer, Apache, and Concho. They're looking for people. Then we've got the majors that install installations there that need instrumentation engineers from electrical. And these are Conoco, Chevron, big leaseholders in the Permian Basin. And then we've got, in addition to that, we've got all of the support industry that goes along with that. So we've got a very large industrial base in Odessa that supplies oil field equipment actually worldwide, not just to the Permian Basin. And so they need electrical engineers for automation and for instrumentation work. And then the actual production and the pumping units, they're more into, instrumentation and automation as well, but also into electric power, getting electric power to these pumping units to get the oil out of the ground. It's one of the most heavily electrified rural areas in the world.
Okay, Ms. Costa?
Does the UT Permian Basin, I would assume you do, but just a quick question, have articulation agreements with Odessa College and Midland Junior College, both?
We do.
Great.
We do.
Thank you.
May I ask a quick process question to just clarify what you were saying? So if I understand it correctly, approval with contingencies, formerly, you did not require the contingencies to be met before approval was granted?
No, we have almost always had or not always, but often we have contingencies placed on programs that are dependent upon the institution doing certain things over a period of time. And that's particularly true of doctoral programs, is where you'll see a lot of these. What is different about this is that we're altering the way that we view faculty. Because before we would have said you need to have at least 3 FTE in place. We may have, as David pointed out, we may have relaxed that at some point, but our ability to follow up on that was hindered. And what this does is it tries to give the institutions a more realistic timeline for hiring faculty as the program begins and then grows, but it also gives us the ability to follow up on that. And if the institution is not doing what they agreed to do, then frankly, we can then rescind the approval of the program.
So there's no chance then, and there's no chance now, that a student could enroll in a program that would not have the requisite higher level faculty. Is that correct?
Prior to this more specific approach, that could have happened.
Okay.
And I don't want to name it, but I could name one program in which the faculty were not hired after several years, and
Okay.
I have no doubt that with this in place, institutions will do that. And it also puts some onus on us to make sure we're paying attention, but it also makes clear in a public fashion, this has to happen before this happens. And in each case, what those are will be discussed with the institution, as they were in this case. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of good dialogue here, and it made it actually very easy to make happen. And I appreciate that.
And the essential point is we cannot offer these two programs without hiring those faculty per our plan. We just can't do it. We don't have allied faculty members that we could just shift over to offer electrical or chemical engineering. We have to make these hires, and we will.
This sounds like a change for the better.
Yes, I have discussed this with Dr. Peebles and the 50-mile rule. He and I have discussions on that often. So again, any other discussion on it?
The
Yes.
2.7 million that the legislature appropriated, is that a 5-year number too, or that's just a 1-year biennium, right?
Biennium, yes.
Right. So your total so your total first year would be 3.2 million exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm assuming if you're reading, it's correct. Yeah, yes. It's right there.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, again, a reminder, we're on item 5M, and this is the adoption of the University of Texas Permian Basin Bachelor of Science degree with a major in electrical engineering. That's what we're voting on first, the electrical engineering. Do I have a motion? Okay, Mr. Steenle makes the motion. Second? Ms. Acosta. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5N is a consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to this committee relating to the request for a new degree program from the University of Texas Permian Basin for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in chemical engineering. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. So this program, because they were brought to us at the same time and really in a lot of ways have the same set of circumstances attached to them, have the same contingencies attached to those that the electrical engineering program has. And one other point about this in terms of workforce demand is that this is another case of where the workforce demand is difficult to parse out because while on a statewide or a national basis, it appears that we may be producing more, particularly electrical engineers than we need, this is also the case of where it is difficult to hire and not necessarily hire, but to retain engineers in the region. And so part of this is based on the notion that if you home grow some of your own, they're more likely to stay. So.
Any questions or discussion? Motion by Mr. Steen, second?
I had a quick question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Raven.
So there's 2.4 for chemical engineering, 2.5 for petroleum engineering, and the 2.7 that you're getting from the legislature. So it's basically 7.6 million, correct? For how much of that 7.6 would be faculty salary? You know?
Well, I think we have on there about I think we got 1.6 for
both?
three. Yeah, well, for each, I believe over 5 years. Yes, because we're hiring 3 or 4 people, 3 tenured and 1 lecturer.
Yes, we intend to hire 3 tenure track faculty and then 1 combination lab tech and.
For both disciplines?
Yes.
For each discipline.
Total of 8. For each, yes. And according to our table.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, discussions? Okay, we have a motion on the floor for Mr. Steen for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Raven. All in favor, please motion by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 6 is adjournment. Yes, Mr. Steen.
So earlier, we were throwing out accolades to our commissioner, and he immediately talked about his great staff. And so I just, earlier I was kind of kidding Dr. Peoples because I asked him how many advisory committees we have, and it's rarely he doesn't have the exact answer. And it pretty much amazes me, all of you all, Dr. Booker and Dr. Gardner, just the command you have over all this material. So anyway, you do have a fantastic group of people around you, so.
I also agree with that. I call Dr. Peoples quite a bit, and he comes up with the answers very quickly.
Well, and Ms. Jones, earlier you asked that question about the statute, and he just came forward and could give you kind of chapter and verse on that. So that's the kind of, that's the kind of great people we have around here.
Very well said, Mr. Steen. Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Raven, second by Ms. Acosta. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
I'll be done with school in May. I'll take the bar.
I'll be green.
That's my.